This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention pledges to support DR Congo on Ebola outbreak. At least 4 dead in fight for Sidama semi-autonomous state in Ethiopia. And South Africa's former president Jacob Zuma responds to state capture allegations. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. In business, Nigeria's labor unions are in talks with government to stop strike over pay. And in sports, Algeria beat Senegal to be crowned winners of the 2019 edition of the Africa Cup of Nations. We start in the DRC, where the country is continuing to deal with its Ebola outbreak. The World Health Organization declared the outbreak an emergency of global concern. Over 1,600 have died from the disease.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has been battling the worst Ebola outbreak in its history. The provinces of North Kivu and Ituri have borne most of the brunt of the outbreak. But as reports of cases emerged in Uganda, fear of the disease spread rose. On July 17th, the World Health Organization declared the outbreak a global health emergency. Despite raising the threat level, John Kengasong, the director of the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, remains optimistic.
The current disease outbreak in Democratic Republic of Congo is the second largest Ebola outbreak in the history of Ebola. Interestingly, about 700 confirmed cases have been cured. So this is very good news. So it means Ebola is not a death sentence, that we still have chances of surviving.
By raising the threat level, the WHO looks to galvanize support, as well as increase the funds available to support the current operations.
The outbreak is serious, unusual, unexpected, and is spreading, and carries implications for public health beyond the affected state national borders and require international action. The African Union, through the Africa CDC, has been supporting the response in renewing its commitment to supporting the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
By raising the threat level, the WHO looks to galvanize support, as well as increase the funds available to support the current operations. The WHO's PHEIC emergency provision is the highest alarm the body can sound, and has only been used 4 times previously. Community mistrust as well as instability have challenged efforts to stop the outbreak. Astatal, CGTN.
And staying in the DRC, prevention methods are being stepped on the border shared with Rwanda. From fever checks to hand washing stations, authorities are working to prevent the spread of Ebola.
Whether you're in a car or on foot, police on the border between Rwanda and the DRC are enforcing fever checks and hand washing. The checks are taking place in Goma, where the first Ebola case of the current outbreak was reported. The countries share a border with people often crossing to either side during the day. The World Health Organization declared the country's Ebola outbreak a global health emergency. The body did not recommend any travel or trade restrictions.
This statement, I find it is a really responsible thing to do, because if it continues like this, I think it's normal that they close the borders. We must not infect others.
Rwanda depends on Congo just as Congo depends on Rwanda. If they close the border, many Rwandans who work in the Congo and still live in Rwanda will be affected. This means that they will not cross again. For me as a taxi driver, I depend on this border. It is here that I make the money to pay for food for my children and other things. If they close the border, we will have less work. It is more important for WHO to provide the cure for the Ebola virus.
Though reports had emerged that a fishmonger who died in Uganda from the virus had crossed it to Rwanda, the government dismissed the claims. The head of communication for the Rwanda Biomedical Center added the country had a strong surveillance system in place to prevent the disease's spread. Astatal, CGTN.
Let's go to Nigeria now, where 6 people are missing after an attack on an aid convoy in the northeastern state of Borno. The hit is said to have been carried out by Islamist insurgents. 1 driver was killed while 2 others are missing. 1 staff member and 3 health workers are also missing. According to Action Against Hunger, an international humanitarian organization, the aid workers were heading to the community of Damasak, where they are providing assistance to victims of Boko Haram violence in the region. Around 30,000 people have been killed in the insurgency and more than 2 million have been forced to flee their homes. About 4 protesters have died of gunshot wounds suffered in clashes between Ethiopian security forces and activists. This is following the fight for a new autonomous region for the Sidama ethnic group based in the southern city of Hawassa in Ethiopia. CGTN's Girum Chala reports.
The last few days were rather agonizing in one of Ethiopia's bustling cities, Hawassa. The city was the one place Sidama activists threatened to form a regional state out of the southern Ethiopian nations and nationalities' regional government. Security personnel, including the special force of the Ethiopian army, have been fully engaged and managed to control the situation. But not without a cost. 4 people were reported dead, 3 male and 1 woman. Sources including police in the city and hospitals have confirmed this number. Cause of death for the protesters is confrontation with the army's security. The situation in the southern Ethiopian city of Hawassa is now calm, and we have heard daily activities are returning to normalcy. Sidama activists and party leaders have also announced delaying the formation of their new regional government. They said they will follow the constitutional procedure. The government and the Ethiopian Electoral Board have asked the protesters to respect the law and wait for a referendum which should take place in about 5 months' time. Grumjala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We now head to South Africa, where former President Jacob Zuma has been responding to questions about alleged state capture. His legal team threatened to pull him out of the corruption inquiry, saying he was being treated unfairly. Angela Coppola has been following the Commission's work and filed the following report.
Zuma was slated to testify for 5 days. A day of hearings was lost as he and his legal counsel felt that he wasn't being fairly treated. On Friday, the Zuma team dropped a bombshell. This after the Commission made their position very clear.
We cannot enter into any arrangement to favour, and this is what is being asked for. Mr. Zuma and his legal team are in effect asking to be excused from the application of the rules.
The 2 sides were poles apart and nowhere near resolving their differences.
Important for me to be honest with you and state assuming what we assumed, why we're here today. Chair, we're here today to tell you that we will take no further part in this proceeding.
At this stage, just before lunch, it appeared that Zuma would carry out his threat, leaving the Commission high and dry. There was a hurried round of consultations in Zondo's chambers.
The former president, I've been told, has indicated that he wishes to continue to cooperate with this commission.
Analysts suggest that Zuma gained a valuable concession, getting a list of areas of interest from the Commission that he would then respond to in writing, and at a later stage reappear.
I must thank you for the intervention you made that made the situation to be looked at and arrived at some common point in terms of continuing with the process, as it were. I think it is the right of anyone to raise concerns if there are concerns.
A day of high drama has come to an end with an agreement that both legal teams are going to work together, and Zuma does get his way because he now knows the areas of interest that they want to pursue. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
In Algeria, protests have gained momentum once again in the capital to demand for radical political reforms and the departure of the ruling elite. Algerians are now seeking the resignation of interim President Abdelkader Ben Salah and Prime Minister Noureddine Bedoui. This comes after President Abdelaziz Bouteflika was forced to end a 20-year rule earlier this year. The army has been seeking to hold a presidential election. However, a vote previously planned for July 4th was postponed after authorities cited lack of candidates. No new date has been set for the vote. The removal of the remaining symbols of the old guard remains on the top agenda for demonstrators.
We went out today because we are keeping our movement and we demand the constituent power to the people.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Coming up. African military officials visit China to enhance peace and security cooperation. And South Africa deploy troops in Cape Town to release residents from gangsters' grip.
Africa, the most iconic wildlife destination in the world. Its unique ecosystems were formed over countless eons. Many people can only dream of visiting this natural paradise. But now, for the first time ever, CGTN Wild Wonderland live show is bringing Africa to you through all of our online platforms. 14 episodes from July 22nd to 28th take you to adventure through the Great Plains of Kenya's Masai Mara, the Serengeti in Tanzania, and the Greater Kruger Park in South Africa. Welcome aboard the wildest ride of a lifetime. This is Wild Wonderland live show, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
You're watching Africa Live. Welcome back. A number of African military officials were in Shanghai on Friday for a special visit as part of the China-Africa Peace and Security Forum, which aims to enhance peace and security cooperation between China and Africa.
Military officials from African nations paid a visit to the Naval Medical University of the People's Liberation Army in Shanghai on Friday. The special trip is part of the first China-Africa Peace and Security Forum.
Our school has frequent exchanges with African nations. Over 500 medical students from 16 African countries have graduated from here. We've also organised various training courses for different levels of medical workers from Africa.
Over the past decade, China has played an active role in helping maintain peace and security in Africa. The visiting officials said they were willing to continue working with China to safeguard peace and stability on the African continent and the rest of the world.
And I think that China has a big role to play, not a small role, big role to play in managing the safety of the waters around Africa. And I think China should take up that role. The Western countries, a lot of countries are trying to put together and play a role. But I think China should come in a big way, very big way, to play a role with the African countries.
This cooperation, we decide together, China and Africa, to work together to build peace and to have a good security in this area, in Africa, in the world. I think alone we cannot do it.
China's hospital ship, known as the Peace Ark, set sail for Africa in 2017 and provided free medical services in 7 African countries. The mission was highly praised by local residents.
It is our mutual interest to be understand each other because it will make an opportunity to build trust and also to build our capabilities together, to fight together against all illegal traffics in the Gulf of Guinea. So the relationships between China and Africa and mostly most of our countries around the Gulf of Guinea is really, really welcome.
Before trip to Shanghai, the visiting African officials have discussed further cooperation with their Chinese counterparts in Beijing during the week-long forum. Lin Nan, CGTN, Shanghai.
Let us now head to South Africa, where the army is active in Cape Town's most gang-infested areas in a bid to root out gangsters and drug peddlers. The move comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa gave the green light to send in the National Defence Force troops. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more.
It's been a week since President Ramaphosa approved the deployment of armed forces to the Cape's crime hotspots. And now there are finally boots on the ground. Some community members believe their prayers have been answered, with the army playing a vital force multiplying role in assisting police to crack down on violent crimes.
We want the army to protect us because here it's like, I can't tell you how many people has died here already. I think it's over 60 people already in Blakkiesdorp that has been passed on. And through gangsterism and through violence and through lots of other issues.
They've been deployed to 10 areas identified with the worst crime levels in the city, including Blakkiesdorp, which is considered as a war zone under the grip of gangsters. Juliette Damas is one person who has felt the wrath that violence and unemployment can have on her family firsthand, after a 21-year-old son was gunned down in a suspected gang hit.
He was a gangster. He was selling drugs for the gangsters. And then he shot him. Shot him there in the back, and when I come there, he's laying there with a bullet in his stomach.
For it's little consolation to see troops rolling in, but for others it isn't. They're just glad to see the long arm of the law working to prevent further violence. It was just a few days ago that gang violence claimed its latest victim on these streets. And even though the army is here, there are still underlying social issues at play. Unemployment levels are high, which has left many turning to a life of crime and drugs. And that has had an adverse effect on many families.
Frustrated, and that's why they do the things that they do. They go to the road and go rob the people. That's what they do. The ladies, they scuttle around to give food to their children with their husbands.
For now, though, troops and the police will continue conducting search and seizure operations, while all three spheres of government work on a more holistic long-term plan that will bring much-needed relief to many here. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Still in South Africa, Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula says the South African National Defence Force is becoming increasingly more unsustainable due to severe underfunding. She was speaking in Parliament in Cape Town in the Western Cape, where she presented her department's budget for 2019-2020. Here's Renee Delcamp with more on that.
The South African Defence Minister said the SANDF had been allocated around $3.6 billion for the 2019-2020 financial year, although it needed around $5.7 billion to run its military programs and projects.
This reduction will certainly and directly impact on the training, equipment, sustainments, core capabilities and operational output of the Defence Force.
She said the declining defence budget meant that South Africa had reached the stage where it had to decide between the kind of defence force it wanted and the one it could afford. But she stressed that South Africa remained a significant contributor to peacekeeping operations on the African continent.
We strive towards sustaining long-range maritime and air patrols in the Mozambican Channel and to expand such patrols to the West Coast. South Africa seeks to promote greater peace, security and stability in the region and elsewhere on the continent in the fulfillment of Madiba's vision.
The minister said the SANDF was working hard to combat the threats posed by South Africa's porous borders, as well as the growing threats of terrorism, fundamentalism and cybercrime. She said organised and violent crime threatened the sovereignty and integrity of the state, and said the kind of crime being perpetrated in areas around Cape Town showed that there was a serious undermining of the authority of the state. This made it imperative for members of the South African National Defence Force to be deployed to support the police.
The Commander-in-Chief has ordered the SANDF to deploy in cooperation with the South African Police Service in the Western Cape Province to combat crime and stabilize the security situation through intelligence-led operations. The ongoing intelligence assessment will then determine the right time for the withdrawal of the South African National Defence Force.
The South African National Defence Force said the soldiers had already arrived in the crime-stricken city of Cape Town to assist with police operations, and their deployment was imminent. Renat Alkam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Alarmed by increasing xenophobia and hate speech around the world, the United Nations has launched an ambitious plan to tackle the vice head-on. And the man leading that fight is Adama Dieng, the UN Secretary-General's Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide. Our UN correspondent Liling Tan sits down with Mr. Dieng, who explains why it's important to take action now.
The past year has seen deadly, hate-inspired attacks around the world, from the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting to the mosque attacks in New Zealand to the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka. The United Nations says enough is enough.
We are witnessing today a rise of anti-Semitism, racism. We are seeing refugees, migrants being vilified and humiliated. When we see today the rise of neo-Nazi groups, when we see extreme right-wing groups in many parts of the world, and particularly in the Western world, we need to be very vigilant. We should not forget that what happened in Europe in the 40s with the Holocaust, it did not start with the gas chambers. It did not start with the bombs. It started with words. The genocide in Rwanda did not start with the machetes. It started long before, at a time when the Tutsis were being named cockroaches, were being named after animals' names. So therefore, we have to realize that hate speech can lead to hate crimes, hate speech can lead to genocide, to crimes against humanity, etc.
To what extent do you think the rhetoric that we're hearing now out of the White House and elsewhere within the US falls under the definition of hate speech, under the UN definition of hate speech?
There is no international legal definition of hate speech. But we all understand clearly what we mean by hate speech. Although the characterization of what is hateful is controversial, it is disputed, but at the United Nations, we do understand by hate speech any kind of communication in speech, in writing, in behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of its race, nationality, gender, descent. Others who are targeted because of their religion or because of their ethnicity.
Here in the United States, critics are accusing President Donald Trump of racism for inciting hate through his handling of the border crisis and for his attacks on minority congresswomen, including Somalia-born American Ilhan Omar.
What do you make of U.S. President Donald Trump's comments recently to the congresswomen, the 4 minority congresswomen, telling them to go back to their home countries when they're Americans? What do you make of that kind of talk?
Well, I would simply say that diversity is a richness. Diversity is not a threat. And the United States, if it is today one of the most powerful countries, it is thanks to the diversity in this country. This is the country of migrants.
So where do you draw the line, though, between condemning hate speech and protecting freedom of speech? Where do you draw the line?
Addressing hate speech does not mean limiting or prohibiting freedom of speech. It means keeping hate speech from escalating into something more dangerous. Particularly incitement to discrimination, to violence, or incitement to genocide, which is prohibited under international law.
To tackle this, the UN is harnessing the power of its key agencies and global partners to monitor and analyze hate speech as well as address its root causes. But perhaps one of the most ambitious goals under its action plan is to prevent and combat the spread of hate speech on social media. Li Tan, CGTN at the United Nations in New York.
Here in Kenya, the government has formally launched Africa's biggest wind power plant. The scheme that cost about $680 million already provides nearly a fifth of the country's energy needs. And as CGTN's Astatal reports, this is the largest in Kenya's history.
365 wind turbines stand on the eastern shores of Lake Turkana. The wind farm is delivering 310 megawatts of renewable power to the national grid of East Africa's most dynamic economy. Despite being beset with delays and taking nearly a decade to rise from the arid landscape 600 kilometers north of Nairobi, the Lake Turkana Wind Project is the largest private investment in Kenya's history.
Today, we again raise the bar for the continent as we unveil Africa's single largest wind farm, the Lake Turkana Wind Power Project.
The turbines, scattered across Turkana's stark lunar landscape and rocky hills, began delivering electricity last September. Their giant blades deliver 15% of Kenya's entire installed capacity and are connected to the national grid through a 428-kilometer power line.
This monumental project, comprising 365 wind turbines of 850 kilowatts each, with a total installed capacity of 310 megawatts.
It is euphoric. You start what was a dream, putting together the largest private sector investment in a country's history that comprises the largest wind farm on the continent in an area that is what you see here. And finally, you are able to generate and produce the power.
The nearly 50-meter turbines were engineered to handle the fierce gusts that tear through the Turkana corridor, a wind tunnel that generates optimal conditions year-round. The project has been closely watched as a case study of investing in renewables in Africa, where demand for energy is soaring as economies grow and populations swell. Astatal, CGTN.
Private investment is bringing success to refugees in Uganda's numerous settlements, as well as new opportunities for refugees and locals. A Congolese refugee doctor who fled Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is now helping save lives using his small pharmacy at the Chagwali refugee settlement in Uganda. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi brings us more from Uganda.
In a busy trading center codenamed Little Congo in Uganda's Changwali refugee settlement, a Congolese refugee doctor is helping to save lives through his small pharmacy. Change Mungavu fled eastern DRC to Uganda 2 years ago and immediately opened a pharmacy at the settlement where he sells drugs to sick refugees. Mugavu says he studied medicine while in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the unrest in his home country could not allow him to practice as a doctor. Mugavu is now making the best out of his profession by serving the refugee community in Changwali, selling drugs and injecting sick refugees at his small pharmacy.
We do small businesses in this market. This is a business that we used to do in our home country, but due to the unrest we could not do it anymore. But the biggest challenge is that the population does not have enough money.
Business is booming for Mugavu, who has lived in Uganda for the last 2 years. Mugavu says feeding his 8 children is a daily struggle that requires hard work. But with his small business, he has managed to provide for his family despite being a refugee. Feeding for many refugees is a daily struggle, but some have been able to start thriving small businesses to support their families. Mary Muswaza is another successful businesswoman in Changwali settlement. Through her little savings, she has been able to buy and sell beans at the local refugee market, which has helped to feed her family.
I started this business of selling beans because life here is very difficult, so we try to do something because the food we are given as refugees does not help us at all. They bring us food, but it's little and cannot take us for a week.
Praised for its progressive policies, Uganda allows refugees to work, start businesses and own property. However, the scale of recent arrivals from the DRC has strained already overstretched resources. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Hoima District, Uganda.
And coming up in business news, Nigeria's labor unions are in talks with government to stop strike over pay. And population and economic growth to push up number of South Africa's online shoppers.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Labor unions in Nigeria are in talks with the government to try and avoid a major strike over pay. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari signed a new minimum wage into law in April. However, some workers are unhappy that they are not included in the bracket. CGTN's Willie Haza reports from Abuja.
President Muhammadu Buhari signed a new minimum wage into law in April. It raises the minimum wage from $50 to about $83 per month. It's due to take effect this month, but some workers are annoyed it only applies to junior employees currently earning below the minimum wage. Labor unions say members who are already paid above that level should get a similar boost.
What is being discussed at the level of the civil service is the consequential adjustment, and I'm aware that the process is ongoing. It's already a law. Every public officer has sworn to uphold the law of our country. So once it's a law, there is no whether you like it or you don't like it. No, we have passed that stage. It's when it's not a law that you can be able to navigate and say whether you have ability or you don't have ability. Once it's a law, it's already something. And what is even being discussed is not about whether they will implement or no. No, it's the quantum of consequential adjustment.
I have also been conscious.
But Nigeria's external debts have doubled in 4 years, mainly as a result of government borrowing. And many state governments say they still struggle to pay workers the old minimum wage. However, unions claim it's a lack of respect for employees.
Why you have bad ones that are not paying on time, we have good ones that are paying as and when due. And I can give you many examples. So it's not really about the economic challenges, about the priorities. Any person that will, any government that will not prioritize the payment of workers' salary, workers work to earn a living. If you cannot prioritize workers' pay, we have no business to do with you. We will engage you openly, and we have done that openly. Time without number, we have done that.
Nigeria is home to nearly 100 million people living in extreme poverty, which includes many public servants who still earn below $50 per month. The government has directed the National Salaries, Income and Wages Commission to look into complaints raised by the workers. If wage negotiations don't reach agreement, A strike has been threatened, which could bring major costs to the country's economy.
The implementation of the new salary of $83 per month is one of ways the government is looking to lift millions of its citizens above the poverty line of below $1.90 per day. Unions say the government must live up to that plan and look at the wages for higher earners too. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Projections show that by 2021, there will be nearly 25 million online shoppers in South Africa. And it's expected that they will spend in the region of $190 each by 2023. Currently, those shoppers are spending $95 each in the electronics and media sectors. Angela Coppola has a look at what's happening in the rest of Africa.
South African online shopping growth has increased annually at 20%, but the retail component of that is still only 1.4%.
In the rest of Africa, it's far lower than that. The only real hotspots are Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya. Kenya probably the most sophisticated in terms of platforms, and also the integration of M-Pesa for mobile payments has been a big boost in Kenya. Nigeria probably has the biggest online retail operation in terms of its potential, which is Jumia, and that has in fact been listed on one of the US stock exchanges.
The opportunities for growth in online retail shopping are confined to specific areas.
Cities like Lagos and Nairobi are definitely ready for online shopping. They have extensive online retail services available in those markets. And that is because the infrastructure is there, the communications is there, banks are there as well. Although online retail is supposed to be digital, it is very much facilitated by the existence of physical infrastructure like transport networks, the roads, delivery services, and banking services.
Looking at the South African online shopping market, data is fairly accurate. Similar information isn't available continentally, however.
At this stage, we can't really see the percentage of impact that online retail is making outside of South Africa. In South Africa, we have an exact number. Worldwide Works conducted research that showed that 1.4% of total retail in South Africa is conducted online. The total retail market in South Africa is just over 1 trillion rand, and online retail makes up about 14 billion rand of that.
The retail shopping environment is different in each of the continent's countries.
The difference between South Africa and other markets across Africa is that there's a very powerful mall culture of people going to shopping malls to do their shopping. And that is what's keeping online retail from making a bigger impact on this economy. In other African markets, however, you don't have that extensive mall culture or a mall infrastructure.
The growth of retail online shopping is patchy at the best of times on the continent and largely depends on sufficient infrastructure and access to payment options. And of course, the most important, disposable income. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The decision by South Africa's Reserve Bank to cut its repo rate by 25 basis points has been broadly welcomed. On Thursday, the bank cut its benchmark lending rate for the first time since last March to 6.5%. The move is aimed at stimulating more growth in the stagnating South African economy. CGTN Sumitra Naidu with the details.
It's a good thing because much more people that actually need help financially can actually apply for loans and don't have to pay more.
Hopefully it will empower our people financially, so it's a good thing. It's a very positive change. It's been a while since it's been lowered.
Amazing, everything is so tight. Petrol price of food, etc. So at least we get some relief with the bond rates.
The commercial banks have already reduced the prime lending rate to 10%. For those paying off credit cards, home loans and other debt, the reduced interest rate will provide some relief. But economists are cautioning that there's still some tough times ahead.
So we found that housing prices have also been quite depressed in the last couple of years. Real growth in the housing market has actually been negative for some time. And this has been on the back of the consumer remaining depressed and the willingness to purchase new properties remaining quite depressed. So going forward, while this will help home loans picking up, we do need to see a resumption in economic growth and a resumption in consumer sentiment in order to see the purchase of bigger, durable good items like homes.
The Reserve Bank lowered its growth forecast for 2019 down to a mere 0.6%, with a warning that monetary policy is not the answer to reviving this weak economy.
We do need to see some structural reforms or micro reforms in order to kickstart growth. Now, you do get some of the shorter term reforms that we can do, and these are the so-called low-hanging fruits. So, for example, we can reduce port tariffs, we can make it easier for tourists to come into the country, and then we have the longer standing reforms, fixing Eskom, the other state-owned enterprises, making sure that they are on firm financial footing.
The rand rallied soon after the Reserve Bank announced the rate cut, suggesting more relief could be in the offing, especially if the US Federal Reserve cuts its own borrowing rates aggressively next week. There are still concerns, though, over the US-China trade spat, rising tensions in the Middle East, and Brexit that could cause volatility in the rand again, and that won't be good for inflation. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The African Cup of Nations, hosted by Egypt, ended Friday with the final between Algeria and Senegal. Yasser Hakim takes us through the cost and expected revenue from the championship that started on the 21st of June.
According to CAF's officials, the revenue from this year's competition has exceeded the last one in 2017.
In 2013, South Africa, the revenue for CAF was $49 million. In 2015, the income was $50 million. In 2017, the tournament in Gabon, it was $67 million. As for the current tournament in Egypt, revenue is $83 million.
But the cost of hosting the tournament has been exceptionally high as well.
Egypt was granted hosting the tournament just 4 months before it began after Cameroon stepped down. Therefore, the cost of renovating the stadiums, pitches, training facilities, and other details in such a short time, the cost was high. According to the Egyptian Football Association, it exceeded $30 million. Also, having 24 teams for the first time raised the expenses drastically. But in the long run, it's good for Egypt to have updated and developed infrastructure that has been neglected for years.
Ticket prices were expensive for the average Egyptian, so the attendance for the games has been low, except in Egypt's matches. And this has had an impact on the revenue. But Egypt was hoping that several sectors, such as tourism and hospitality, would benefit from the arrival of African fans for the tournament.
I think that was the weakness. Because of the complicated fan ID system for match tickets and expensive ticket prices, the attendance was very low and the number of fans arriving from African countries was less than expected. So I don't think the tourism sector benefited much except for receiving and hosting the delegations of the 24 competing nations. However, it was an opportunity to open up the African tourism market, and I hope the Cup would attract more African visitors in the future.
As the tournament comes to a close, organizers say the financial rewards are not the priority in the first place. Organizers feel that the championship has achieved its targets of advertising Egypt abroad. First, as a good candidate to host major international events, and second, as a safe and attractive tourism destination for travelers from around the world. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. President Cyril Ramaphosa honors Nelson Mandela Day by visiting sick children.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Ntah, an anchor for CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South South African President Cyril Ramaphosa celebrated International Nelson Mandela Day at the Red Cross Children's War Memorial Hospital in Cape Town, where he spent 67 minutes rubbing shoulders with some of the young patients. President Ramaphosa said it was important to spend time with the kids, as it was the kind of thing Nelson Mandela would have done. CGTN's Renee Delcam with the details.
President Ramaphosa said he had come to the hospital to lift the spirits of some of the pediatric patients, but instead they had lifted his with their confidence and positivity. He met with former patients who are reporters on the hospital's radio station RX Radio and told them how International Nelson Mandela Day was being celebrated across the globe.
People started this morning in New Zealand, in Australia, in China, in India, and now we are doing it here all over the world. So we are one of billions of people around the world who are celebrating an icon.
The kids said they were nervous and excited to meet President Ramaphosa, but he had put them at ease.
He told us that we will follow Nelson Mandela's footsteps, and he enjoyed his Mandela Day with us. He never enjoyed the Mandela Day as he enjoyed it today.
And they also remembered how the late Nelson Mandela had sacrificed years of his freedom for them.
President Mandela was special to me because he fought for freedom and he fought for us. And even more important, he spent 27 years in jail just to let us be free.
Nelson Mandela Day means that we should celebrate his life, his legacy that he left for us. We should not forget about him just because he passed away, and not forget the fact that he went to jail for 27 years and he fought for our freedom.
This is what Nelson Mandela was about: love for young people, love for children, and in many ways, maybe I'm walking in Nelson Mandela's footsteps by coming here to the Children's Hospital.
President Cyril Ramaphosa told the young radio presenters and reporters that he was extremely impressed with their courage and hopefulness, and he thanked the children of Red Cross Hospital for making this Nelson Mandela Day an unforgettable one. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
To health matters now. According to the World Health Organization, tuberculosis is one of the top 10 causes of death worldwide. HIV-positive people or people living with diabetes are particularly vulnerable to contracting the infection. The Rutsanana Polyclinic in Harare is one of the 10 pilot clinics in the country offering free multiple disease treatments to save Zimbabwe's sick and fight these diseases.
The contagious infection is found in the lungs and is caused by breathing in the bacteria from tiny droplets sneezed or coughed out. People with diabetes have a higher risk of developing TB, so patients in the one-stop clinics are tested for both diseases. The treatment centers offer free diagnosis for TB, diabetes and HIV.
If one is on TB treatment and if he also has TB diabetes and the diabetes is well controlled, chances of him recovering very well are very high.
At least you cut on transport costs if you get treated for tuberculosis and diabetes in one place. It is very different from getting these services in two different places.
The clinics have also linked TB testing and treatment with HIV prevention programs. Close to the main gate of the Rutsanana Polyclinic in Harare, a self-testing HIV tent has been erected to encourage people to check their status. The health center also offers voluntary HIV counseling and antiretroviral treatment.
We looked at the incidence of HIV and how it has been coming down, and the various responses that government, civil society, NGOs have taken to bring the incidence down.
The pilot clinics have become lifesavers for the poor, but only if they happen to live near them. Majority of the population still does not have access to the one-stop clinics. As a result, there are plans to scale up the program with another 46 similar centers to be rolled out across Zimbabwe. Bulkisa Nyabwa, CGTN.
Coming up in sports. Algeria beats Senegal to be crowned winners of the 2019 edition of the Africa Cup of Nations.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout,